is broken when we're streaming on switch views real quick. So here's the Kanban board. Um, oh, let me back up a little bit. So we're going to be building a Slack clone called Whack. Um, so here's the Kanban board for that, and you can see kind of here's all the things we did last night. So uh, everything that create an empty node project, which is basically open a directory and run npm init, and you have an empty node project. But we installed Jest and we wrote a canary test just to make sure, we configured Jest right and everything was cool. Um, so we got through all of this. We opened this merge request. And you see I've got a task here to go actually like write content for this. So if we open this up, um, it was basically as I'm going out and Googling things and getting different resources, I just pasted links in here. So whenever all is said and done, I'll come back through here, and this is almost kind of my outline for what to write up. This is something else I wish there was more of out on the web. You can go find a well curated, well organized, scripted tutorial on how to write a Vue app, or how to do such and such in Express, or how to do such and such in Laravel. But that person sat down for like 10 hours to produce 30 minutes of content, and it's perfect. So it's nice because it's probably the best way you're going to get the content delivered to you, and it's probably the best for learning. But I do think it creates a situation where if I'm getting started somewhere and I see this programmer I'm putting on a pedestal, this lecturer say, this is the way you do this, da 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 da, and everything works, and there's no questions, and they're not having to think about anything. It's just flowing naturally. It creates this like unfair expectation of yourself. The fact of the matter is, I've never met a developer that didn't spend at least half their time stumped and Googling resources and all of that. So I kind of hope these show some of that. Like it's not going to be perfect, and even it's the easiest stuff, or what you might think is the easiest thing. You should totally know this is a developer. It's going to stump you. That actually happened last night. We were working with this Express Open API validator package, and we were using a feature that I contributed a couple months ago, and I couldn't remember how it worked. I had to go look at the documentation. I wrote the code, so that happens. That's just life. So, kind of hoping to have kind of an honest. Here's what it really looks like. Here's how the sausage is made. And at the same time kind of produce a useful resource. The end product for this is going to be absolute trash though. Whack, I don't see it going anywhere. We're not going to make the real bucks with our Slack clone. Or maybe we will. I don't know. Maybe I'll never have to work again. So anyway, you can see like these merge requests, I also want these to be like, it's not just going to be like, one commit at the end. Oh, we did it. I kind of want to, even this is an example of, when you're writing commits, come in here and write good commit messages. Describe what you're doing. For someone starting out, this is a great tool for kind of thinking about what you're doing next logically, slowing down, scoping things back, and then doing it. And then when you're done, you commit it, you push it, and you move on to the next thing. So anyway, this is getting kind of rambly, but being that this is last stream's merge request, we're going to go ahead and merge this and start from there. So we can delete this branch. So the first thing, we're going to go look at our board and think about what we want to do. Let's see, is there a way to like archive? Yeah, archive all cards. Let's do that. We don't need to see that anymore. It's been a while since I've messed with GitHub's project stuff. And this is the original. They have like a project beta or something out that basically looks like a giant ass spreadsheet. I played with that for a little bit. I was like, I just want cards I can drag around. But used Trello in the past, Asana. I'm using Jira now, which is working out better than I thought it would. But But yeah, I like this because it's kind of like all in the same place. Like everything you need is right in GitHub. So let's see. We'll need that. This one, we'll go ahead and we'll knock this out today. This is more like boilerplate setup type stuff. Um, and I'll go ahead and we'll do a walkthrough of current state of things. Which is kind of rehash what we did before, but yesterday's stream was like I didn't talk at all. It was just, imagine this guy looking down at his keyboard, just sitting there for 2 hours at 11 at night. So we'll do a walkthrough of the current state of things. The first, I would like to actually get to working on some kind of feature today. I just want to scope it back because I really don't want to be streaming for more than an hour or so. But we'll at least get us a user model created and kind of play around with that a little bit. I want to do something funky with logins in WAC. One, I don't really want there to be a registration process. I kind of want it to feel like some of the old web IRC clients where you just like log in, you pick your nickname, and you're there. But I do want there to be a password component to it. So my thought was, okay, well, you're going to come up to WAC, you'll see the login screen, and then you'll type in a username and you make a gesture. So if you've ever seen like, like in your phone, you can like, it'll have like the nine circles, whatever, you can like draw a pattern and that'll unlock your phone. I kind of want something like that, but for a login page. So like, maybe we see like a picture of something and you can like cycle through those pictures, and otherwise once you find your picture, so it's kind of like one factor in your password that we're setting up, you would draw a gesture somewhere in that picture and that would be your password. The doodle you make on top of an image is your password. And then we know if I make a doodle and then I tomorrow make the same doodle, it's not going to be exactly right. So there's going to be it sounds interesting. There's going to be some fun in like doing like a fuzzy image comparison between the two, and that, if it's 90% there, good enough, that's your password. The reason we want the picture there in the background is so that you have some kind of visual cue of where your doodle should be. Otherwise, you could draw your doodle like a star over here one day, a star in the other kind of the other day, and then doing the whole image comparison thing gets a lot more tricky. So that's gonna be kind of our constraint that makes this a little easier to ship. But anyway, you can see this is kind of like all wrapped up in that card where it's like there's a quick idea and then some loose acceptance criteria. This one's a little bit bigger. This is the gesture-based password matching and the library we're going to use, and kind of how I feel like that's going to go. Anyway, let's pop over to do our walkthrough, and then we can get our MySQL stuff rolling. So let's close that. Let me go look at this pull request one more time, just to kind of get in my head straight what we're going to run through. Otherwise, I'll just go top to bottom through the project and da 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 da. By the way, I don't recommend going and watching the video from yesterday. You'll be absolutely bored out of your mind. And there's nothing really useful there. Some copyright free music playing, and that's about it. Okay, so as far as like stack for this project, we're going to be using Vue.js as our front end framework. We're going to be writing our backend in Node, so everything's JavaScript, which I think is great for someone starting out, not having to learn a different backend language and everything is in JavaScript is awesome, because there's enough variable in web development. It's really hard to get started from scratch now. So Vue.js, we're going to be using Express to implement an API on the back end. Eventually, we're going to be using Socket.o to implement WebSockets, and that'll be used for doing real-time chat. our API is going to be specified using Open API or Swagger, it's been called too. Um, so I'll dig into that, but we use a tool called Stoplight to kind of manage this Open API specification, which is like it's a really big YAML document. So when we get to that, I'll show you the YAML document. It's like super gross, but Stoplight gives us this like graphical editor on top of it. Express Open API Validator is a middleware for Express that knows how to read that specification, and then it automatically creates your routes. It automatically validates any request coming into your API, and it optionally, while you're doing development, will validate your responses. In production, you usually turn that off. But for development purposes, it's really useful because you can go say like this endpoint is supposed to return a response that looks like this, but you didn't write the code to do that. So when you try to use it, you get kind of a fail. Like it'll tell you you're supposed to, this user resource was supposed to have a user name on it, and you didn't do that. So it's interesting, the workflow and like driving out a feature. All right, we're going to be using VS Code as our editor. Really great text editor for a lot of different languages. It is absolutely amazing for doing JavaScript development. And specifically, we'll be digging into using the debugger a lot. Which, if you're starting out, I think in my experience, a lot of developers will go learn how to program and write some apps and write some apps and write some apps, and then they might find testing if they meet the right person and they get into that. And they do well, or they beat their head against the wall and kind of eventually give up, stop writing tests. And the last thing they find is a debugger. And either usually throw it on the ground after they play with it a couple of times, but if they really get into it and learn to understand it, it becomes a very powerful tool. So my advice, and I do this now if I'm picking up a new programming language, the first thing I look for is, do they have a debugger? And most of the time there will be, but it is a invaluable tool for kind of getting in and kind of understanding the flow of a program and being able to set breakpoints and stop execution and then step through execution line by line and see how a program's running. It's very useful. So that could be anything from something your code, like you're writing, or it could be like you want to understand how a third-party package you're using works in a particular part. Lots of usefulness in understanding how to debug. NodeMon is, I don't even know, why did I even put a link to this here? NodeMon is basically just a way of restarting your node process every time files change, because that's a thing with Node. When you run a JavaScript file or module with Node, that process stays running. You can make changes to that file, but it's the version you started with that stays in memory. So you have to, if you didn't have something like NodeMon, you have to go like manually stop the node process and restart it. And then, it's a pain in the butt. So this does that for us. Like I said, Express is our front end or a back end framework. We're basically just going to be building an API with this and serving our Vue application. So we're not going to like bring in Nginx, which is a web server, or Apache, which is a web server, and serve the static bundle. We're just going to have our Express app serve it. Keep things simple. Tailwind CSS is a utility CSS framework we're going to be using quite a lot. Everything we're doing is going to be in Vue 3, and this is something I'm personally I want to learn is I have the book smarts for how the composition API works, but just have not had an opportunity to really flex that skill set in a professional setting. So we've upgraded a few apps from Vue 2 to Vue 3, but we're still using like the options API for all of our components and stuff. So I'm very interested to get in and like write composition, write our composables and be able to have functions that represent an entire feature that export their reactive state and their API for mutation and all that. So we're definitely going to get into this. I'm really interested in this because I've tried writing tests for Vue applications in the past, and it felt icky. Like there was a lot of Vue specific utilities and all this stuff you had to know to mount a component or shallow mount a component and then call methods on it given initial state and see that events have emitted or whatever. I almost so for a lot of the time I would not even test the front end and like the look and feel of things. I would just like my API's got a solid set of tests. That's all that matters. This is interesting because I can have a composable function that I can write jest tests for. I don't need to mount a component. I don't need to deal with a component at all. But my component is going to use that. So it's kind of like it's pushing that bubble out a little more such that the component has like no behavior in it. It's like visuals and wiring to those composable functions. So a lot of words. You can tell I'm excited about that. But we'll get into that. Some Docker stuff. We're literally only using Docker to run a MariaDB database container. That's it. I don't really expect to get like too crazy into Docker. And if somebody wanted to follow along and like use brew to install a Maria server, or they do it themselves on a Linux box, that's totally cool. It doesn't matter at all. But this is definitely worth picking up as a developer. This skill, like a skill set in containers and container ops style stuff. But this balloons out like talk about like set of links. There's a lot here just for building a shitty Slack clone. This is like hundreds of hours of content that's in here that someone else is going to do a lot better than I will. So yeah, that's the pull request. So like, I'm not going to go through each one of these commits, but I did a pretty good job of like committing in logical places and like as I was working through things. So some of these are like, add Jest as a development dependency. Literally all this is doing is installing Jest. So it was an npm install and I decided to commit right after. But if we look at the next commit, this is adding our canary test and the world's simplest GitHub action to basically check out our code, install dependencies, and then run the tests. So this is what I call a canary test. This is what it's, I had a mentor that kind of explained the concept of a canary test to me as like if you're getting, it's kind of this canary in a coal mine metaphor where you're either messing around with a test framework, or it could be like a new library or something, anything, and you want kind of a control that is the simplest possible thing that proves, yes, this thing does what it says on the tin. So a canary test for a test framework is expecting true to be true. It doesn't get simpler than that. So this thankfully passes. If this fails, then you shut down your computer and you go home. You forget about this web development shit. But this test, obviously, this won't stay in the code. Like it's already gone from the code. Here was an example where I wanted to see a test actually cause a failure in the GitHub action. And if you look in GitHub, like all of our commits, they'll print these, like when it passes, they'll print a check mark. When it fails, they'll print an X. So I just wanted to see that happen. Have a demonstration of that. This actually might be the best way to just go through the work yesterday instead of opening up VS Code. So I might just pick up the pace and go through this. Here's us installing Express, so nothing too interesting. I will call out, this is installing Express as a production dependency, but we add this at types Express. This is adding TypeScript definitions for different objects inside of Express to help improve VS Code's ability to do auto completion and like IntelliSense. There's some libraries that bundle their types with the package so that you don't have to also install this, like the at type / package name. I don't think Express does. Maybe it does. I don't know. Normally, if they do, you'll get like a warning whenever you npm install that's the case. Jest is like that. If you don't install the types when you go start writing a Jest test, it won't autocomplete like expect in all of your matchers and all that mess. And you'll just have to remember that, which I there are very few things in web development I would ever say commit to memory. Like you've got way more important things to solve than remembering all the different function names and their casing and how all that shit works. Like rely on your editor to autocomplete all that. Anyway, this is adding a launch config to VS Code so we can launch um, our API using NodeMon and automatically attach the debugger. So now when we make changes to code, that'll automatically restart over and over. So kind of useful. Here is our super simple Express app. So you can see we're not running our JavaScript through Babel or anything like that to be able to use ES6 imports, and we're not running Node with experimental modules support. So we're still having to do these common JS style requires here, which is kind of gross. But one day, we'll be able to import Express from Express, and the clouds will part. But anyway, we grab Express, we create our app instance. App.use is how you add middleware to Express, and there's some built-in ones. So this is a JSON body parser. So this allows Express to process a application/JSON media request body and deal with it. URL encoded does the same thing, but like for URL encoded query params or something. I don't know. These two are like literally in every Express example you'll see on the web. The only difference is they'll use like body parser instead of the ones that are built into Express now. So you want to do this going forward. You don't need body parser anymore. Body parser is just another npm package. Here is how we register a route. So you can say app.get. This is a HTTP verb, so this could be app.put, app.post, app.delete, app.patch. But this is app.get, so when someone sends a get request to /hello, we're going to respond with a JSON payload that has a message property that's set to hello world. When you set up a route, the first argument's your path, and this can be like wildcard, so you can have like hello and then /ID, and it can be like a whatever ID they pass into the URL. We'll get to that later. It doesn't really matter now. But the second argument is your request handler. So it's an anonymous function, or it's really just a function that takes three parameters. We're only using two commonly, but this is your request. So if I wanted to get like query parameters off of my request, I could say rec.query.whatever. Response is our interface to be able to send a response. So we can say res.json, and that'll make a JSON response. We could also say res.send and then pass a string or whatever we want, and that'll just send a plain text string back. After we have a route set up, we have to listen on a port. Right now we're listening on port 3000. We've actually got a task to set up a self-signed SSL certificate and serve this over your normal web ports, so port 80 and port 443. But we're probably not going to do that tonight. We'll do that later. But all that matters is this application sits here and listens on port 3000, and it responds to request to /hello by responding with this. Removed our test, so our GitHub actions are happy. We're installing Express Open API Validator here. All right, so this is a bit more interesting than what we've looked at so far, but actually it's nice. The commit's small enough that you can kind of like figure out what's going on pretty quickly. So if you notice here, we take out this route registration and instead say use this Open API Validator middleware, and we pass it a path to our specification. We tell it to validate requests and responses. And you don't really need to understand what the hell's going on here other than this tells this middleware that there is a controllers directory where there will be node modules with functions that can handle requests based on what's in the OpenAPI spec. So up here, we created a controller called API JS, and inside of it is a function called hello, which has an express handler, which is the same code as what we had down here. So if we go look at our Open API specification, it's rare you'll ever look at this YAML. We've got a tool we use to like there's a GUI for looking at this that's a lot friendlier. This is the nicest you will ever see one of these look. They get really hairy really quick. But this kind of shows what's going on. So this is all kind of header information we don't really care too much about right now. But this key paths represents every URL that our API will kind of respond on. So /hello, we respond to a GET request, and we respond. The only response that's documented is a 200 response, which is okay. That's your standard, everything's cool web response. But then further, we can come down here and say, we can describe the structure of that response. You say the content of the response is application JSON. So it's a JSON document. And its schema is that response must be an object, and it's got a property message of type string, and that message is required. So we come in, we specify all of this. This operation ID is what maps back to our code. So this is in a format of controller dot method name. So I know, just looking at the spec, in the controllers directory, there's going to be a file called api.js. And inside that file, there will be a function exported called hello. And sure enough, there it is, hello inside of api.js. So that's that. But the nice thing here is like, I don't ever come back to this Express app to add new routes. I just go to my spec. I say, I'm going to specify that there is a new endpoint. So if you've ever used OpenAPI or Swagger, there's what they call API drift, where you imagine you've got to come into the code and add a route by hand and do all of this, but you've also got to remember to go document it at the same time. That is a recipe. Like, with one developer that's passionate about like really good documentation for their API, they'll probably keep it in sync. But if you add 10 developers to that, you can guarantee one of the 9 doesn't give a shit about any of that. And it'll get lost in code review. They won't see that, oh, we made a new endpoint, but we didn't document it. Or we changed the response of an endpoint, but we didn't update the documentation. And then your clients are pissed off because your documentation sucks. And then, a crack opens in the earth, and Satan himself comes out and starts kicking ass. Let's go to the next commit. This commit sucks. Eventually, this is going to be a wrapper around the Express app that manages all the HTTP stuff. So our Express app won't have an app.listen in it anymore. It'll just be like, make an Express app and then export that app. And then it's imported in this file. This is just a pattern you'll see in a lot of Node apps, to have a bin directory with a www or web or API or whatever it ends up being called. Okay, so this installs Vue.js. So I use Vue CLI to kind of scaffold out the Vue project. And honestly, I was just curious to see what Vue CLI would do with an existing package.json file. Like, would it clobber it? Would it leave my stuff there? Would it remove all my stuff and add its own stuff? And it actually did a badass job. Like, it left everything there and only added the things it needed to install Vue. But at the same time, it created a 16,000 line long package like.json because there's like 1,600 packages required to build a Vue app. But that's just the reality we live in. The same things done with React or whatever, and nobody wants to go back to jQuery and Vanilla.js for front end development. So we just swallow the fact that you've got enough storage and you're going to download the internet. That's all that's happening here. This is what Vue CLI did to my machine. Git ignores the same thing. This is the commit where we're actually going to serve the Vue bundle. So this change here, we'll probably change the project structure a bit. It might look a little more obvious whenever I actually switch over to VS Code and get out of, commit by commit recap of last night. But one thing I kind of wanted to play with in projects at work, like we have the Express app kind of at the root and the Vue app came later. So it kind of claimed the source directory, but we had like a lib directory and like our server entry point is like right at the root of the project. We had another project where we tried doing top level directories called like client and server and have the two projects in there. I kind of wanted to try an approach with this project where everything's in source, but we put the API in its own directory. So source is going to have a bunch of Vue stuff in it, but then there's an API directory that's going to have our Express API there. So that's what's happening here. I had an API directory at the root. I moved it into source, so I have to update my launch config to get it to point there. In our OpenAPI specification, I wanted to have all of the API requests rooted under a /API/hello. So this is how you do this. You can just be like, the server is /API, and then that automatically, whenever it's creating all the routes, it automatically makes /API/hello, which is awesome. You don't have to change that one place. This is all scaffold stuff from Vue CLI. All right, here is where we serve the Vue bundle. So when we run npm run build, it's going to create a dist directory and it's going to poop a bunch of JavaScript and CSS and HTML and all that in there. This is just the code we run to serve that. I left a note here. I didn't go ahead and create the route, but we're going to need a catch-all route to basically, if you go through the OpenAPI spec, you don't find an API route, and it's not a static asset like a JavaScript file, CSS, HTML, whatever, then you're probably deep linking into the Vue application. So we're going to want the Vue router to handle that URL. So this catch-all route, there won't be like a 404 page that Express serves. On a 404 not found, we'll serve the Vue bundle and let Vue figure it out. And if there's a 404 in the front end, then we'll show a, you done goofed 404 page. But we'll do that later when we actually have a Vue router and we actually, are touching that part of the code. Let's go next. This is adding config for NodeMon. Normally NodeMon will only watch like JavaScript files, but I want it to also watch this one YAML file. So this is our API spec. Whenever we change the OpenAPI spec, I wanted to restart the backend so that we get the fresh, this is how it should work, the fresh middleware. Hey, Torpan. I don't know when you joined. We're going through and we're going to be working on a project called Whack, which is going to be a Slack clone. So I'm going through this and describing kind of what I did last night, which the stream's up if you wanted to watch it, but don't. It's about 2 hours of, my dumb ass sitting, looking at the camera, typing things into the keyboard and setting up, boilerplate stuff. So it's not It's not particularly interesting, but we're kind of going through that now, everything that I did last night. Um, but anyway, doing this for like a reinforcing some skills for me, but I'm also mentoring some junior developers we just hired, and I wanted to give them, but also kind of my former self. Here's an example of a project, and it's not going to be perfect, but here's an example that you could use for a something that feels real, not just a to-do app or something like that. Anyway, we'll pop on through here. Here's where I added Tailwind CSS to the project. So um, this one is maybe a little bit different than how you'll typically see someone install Tailwind. If you actually go to the Tailwind site, uh, I always wondered why in their getting started documentation they'll have like framework guides, but there wasn't one specifically for Vue. There's a Create React App one, but there's one for Vite or Vite, whatever. But this is like a different build tool or a different dev server implementation than the standard Webpack based one that's in Vue 3. It's a hell of a lot faster, but if you're dependent on any Webpack plugins, you can't use Vite. Honestly, this project isn't dependent on any Webpack plugins, so we could use Vite. I'm just not familiar with it. So maybe this is something we switch to later, but the issue is, and what I've come to discover, Vue 3 and Webpack, like the Vue CLI scaffold for Vue 3, ends up using PostCSS 7, and Tailwind 3 requires PostCSS 8. So, like when you install, you can have both in a Node project running or a JavaScript project running at the same time. But there's some voodoo crap that happens that I will never understand and don't want to spend the time understanding it. That if I use Vue CLI's like dev server and I import a Tailwind CSS 3 CSS file and like try to compile it, it ends up using the post CSS that's owned by Vue CLI to do the compile, and then things freak out. And I say I don't want to understand, but that's exactly what's happening. Is you're going to end up using post CSS 7, even though when you install Tailwind CSS, it brought down post CSS 8. Let me see. I'm getting used to like, I've got like chat on my laptop screen or whatever, so I'm getting used to like bouncing up and down. But let's see. Junior full stack developer trying to bring in the field, currently building a Knex. Yeah, yeah. Notice there aren't many options for UI library CSS frameworks for Vue 3. Um, what are you currently using now? The one thing I do like, we're for this project we're going to use Tailwind CSS, which isn't really like a CSS framework like something you'd see in like Vuetify. I don't know if you've checked out Vuetify, but this is a very common one people end up on. I think Vuetify has a Vue 3 version or a compatible version now. Um, okay, so not yet. It's coming at some point, according to this red awesome banner here. The issue I've always had with Vuetify is this is following material design, which is a long way of saying like your app ends up looking like a Google app, basically. But this is a great way of kind of like slapping together a UI and kind of moving on to the next thing. Good old CSS. So the issue happens is like, okay, so if you're working on like a branded app or you want to build something custom, like you want to build a Slack clone using, material design. Material design carries kind of a design philosophy with it too. Like, they've probably got a link somewhere in the Vuetify docs, but there's like a spec Google put out that's like, or design document. Here's kind of material, and it's all about paper and planes and all this stuff. Well, your interfaces are built in those terms. So if you try to come up with something super custom, you can do it, but it always feels like you're fighting, like you're fighting a current or whatever. So so yeah, Vuetify is good. If you just kind of want to forget about the front end altogether, and that sounds negative. I don't mean it negative, but it's like if that's not what you want to focus on, you need a UI as a means to an end. I'd go grab this and run with it. Um, Tailwind CSS is nice because it's just like you're gonna come into Tailwind CSS and there's not gonna be like a button component or anything like that. It's not like Bootstrap where you have like the .btn and different flavors of that. Um, you're writing their homepage is really the best demo for how this works or like the philosophy of this. Um, so it's really like a bunch of very small focused CSS classes that you just tack onto the DOM and it starts styling things. So as they're typing all of this, you can see it making changes actively over here on the left. And this is the dev workflow. Like it really is like, is BG Gray light enough? No, let me try BG Gray 550. Is it okay? That's too light. Let me go BG Gray 200, and you iterate really quick. Yeah, yeah. The class names are 16 lines long. So there's let me find Adam Wathan utilities CSS. He has a blog post. Yeah, there we go. I'll link this real quick. So the CSS class names, that's a thing. Like it is annoying to look at, and it can get out of hand really quick. I read through this blog post, and I feel like I've lived everything Adam's talking about. This is a great blog post from years ago. It kind of goes through the phases, almost like your growth trajectory. So it goes through the phases you're going to go through as you go down the CSS journey. And then he describes where he arrived at, and then he built a framework, and the rest is history. Um, in practice, what ends up happening is once you get all this out of your system, you'll recognize, oh, this is a team member card or something, and you'll make a component called that, and you'll shove all this markup down inside of that component, and you'll forget all of these exist until you need to make a change to this one component. But if you don't take that step to extract that component, you're going to end up with a mess, and it's going to be a pain in the butt. Yeah, it's a styled, yeah, just like a styled component in React. So the nice thing about Tailwind though is that I guess, and this is in the blog post, so definitely go read that blog post. But a lot of folks' first reaction to this is like, what's the difference between this and inline styles? Because it looks like class might as well be style, and then I just literally write CSS and attach to the DOM node. A lot of the difference here is that things like your typographic scales, your spacing scales, your color palettes, all of that are all kind of thought out and standardized. I'm trying to think, like, I'm talking slowly, I'm trying to think of the right words to kind of frame all of this. But something like width 24, height 24, this maps to a certain rem value, so pixel value. And if I were doing inline styles, I might end up with things like, well, I'm going to make this 200 pixels wide and 201 pixels high. And I'm going to have 13 pixels of padding or margin bottom on it or whatever. And you end up with kind of a mess when you come back after you've spent like a month on it. And it's like, the UI kind of looks odd, but I don't know why. And it's a lot of those inconsistencies start to stack up. So Tailwind, you kind of have a config that usually I don't end up modifying because they put a lot of thought into it that I'm, not going to be able to. But a lot of these spacing scales are already there. So I can say like, well, I'm always going to put 3 units of space below my headings. And I'm always going to put 2 units of space between my paragraph tags and whatever makes sense for your project. But then that's standardized throughout the project. The other thing I like about this, their docs are fucking amazing, like really good. So, and it starts like right from the homepage. It's gonna be like super fanboy or whatever, but right from the homepage, you get like in your face. This is how the framework works. This is the workflow you should expect. But then you come in here and I'd be like, I want to find something in margin. You can hit slash, and it'll open up this kind of site-wide search. So like the developer experience here is really good. Um, and then like they have examples here of like what all of them do, and you know it's something to play around with. If you go to play.tailwindcss.com, this gives you kind of a VS Code running in the browser, and you can just mess around with this and play. um, I'll link that. I'll make sure to get these in the merge request for today too. But anyway, yeah. So that's the session on Tailwind. The unfortunate thing though is that if you're not like a good designer or don't have like a good artistic skill set, it's still hard to come up with well, what's a good button look like, or like what's a good UI look like. So you kind of got to fight with that a little bit, um, but yeah. Let me close all this out. All right. So getting all the way back here, we're not using PostCSS to compile or to process the Tailwind CSS file. Um, Tailwind CSS ships with a package that does that for us. So we write some scripts in here to do our build process. So I have like build CSS will actually create a Tailwind CSS file in the Vue project that I import. But this right here is ignored from source control up here. And it's imported during runtime for the dev server or during build time. When we serve, I use concurrently. This is a pretty cool package. This is you can use this to run 2 watch processes or just any number of processes at the same time, and then kind of like pipe the output of all of them into one terminal. Yeah, I know it's the bootstrap looking site. That is, I know exactly what you mean. Funny thing is, it's like you can almost end up with a Tailwind looking site if you're not careful. It's just really, it's a lot harder to do. But especially when they came out and started picking up popularity, there were, Adam would tweet something like an example or whatever, and that would be the style of the day. Like you'd see 40 apps that were like, oh yeah, that's the button from Adam's tweet. But okay, so yeah, some more formatting stuff. Okay, here I just did like this is kind of my version of a canary test for is Tailwind working. We'll actually try to use some classes, and we saw that it was. And here's the import for that ignored Tailwind CSS class. Oh, here's the config for Tailwind CSS. So you can come in here and like, you can extend like the built-in, like let's say a common one would be like your spacing scale or whatever. I think it goes up to like 128 or something along this like golden ratio curve. But you might be like, well, I really need a 256. I try really hard to resist adding new spacing stuff because you start to get back in that territory of now I'm just kind of rolling my own thing. I'm doing inline styles again. So you might be like, no, I really need a 256. I need a width 256, so let me do that. And you have freedom to like override that and get that in here. A more interesting thing I've seen is that when I have those true one-off things, you can name those, you can give those like English names. So it doesn't have to be width 256. It could be like width hero or something like that, whatever the one-off is. And then it's even like, it's almost called out as a one-off. So if you're reviewing code later and you used a width hero for some hero thing on a marketing page or whatever, and then somewhere else a developer's using a width hero to style like a table, what the hell are you doing? That's not what we want to do. Maybe there's a better way to do it. But at least it's not to say like they couldn't. You might say, ship it. That's exactly what we want. But it at least sparks the conversation. Let's see. This is our jest config. This is a whole lot of nothing. I think I came in here, Jest was running kind of slow. So by default, I think the test environment runs in JS DOM. So I moved it over to Node. Could be wrong about that. I think this max workers was what was really pissing the computer off because I'm running on an old MacBook and I think the default here was like 50%. So as long as my CPU was below 50%, it was loading it with workers to run like the 3 tests that are in the project. So you'd get like 5 seconds of startup and then the tests executed in 3 milliseconds. So bringing that down to 1 sped that up. Here's a canary test for after I got Vue imported. I wanted to see if I could import composition function, like part of the composition API, and play around with that in a test and actually see it work. And this is kind of validation on, it's kind of encouraging me towards when I get to the point where we're writing composable functions, or like in React, it'd be like you're writing a hook. I'm going to be able to test those with Jest. And then my component, maybe I don't write a component test because there isn't any logic there anymore. It's literally DOM mounting in the page and having click handlers that call functions out of my compose function. So anyway, we bring in ref and computed. Ref is just like a atom of reactive state. So we can say A is a ref whose initial value is null. Sum is a computed value, and here's the formula for computing that. And now I can come in and immediately say A is null. So A is still null. But computed values update when their dependents are changed. So now if I come in and change value here, because sum is a computed variable, it will automatically update. So I change it here, that computed value, A, I guess it's a dependent of A. So it triggers a watch effect. And then the computed value will be 1 plus 3. And then I can adjust to the 4, and it's 4 plus 3. I can subtract 2, and now it's 5. So this worked and passed, which is awesome. There's the Docker setup. So I made me a little bin MySQL CLI to just get a quick MySQL shell. I'll probably use something like SQL Pro or Tables Plus to access the database if we even need to, but not a whole lot going on there. And then some links to streams and playlists and things. So that was the work that happened yesterday, and that took almost an hour to get through. So we're at the hour, let's call it. And we'll go ahead and we need to do something tonight. I really just want to get off. I want to play some games, do something before I go to sleep. But so we worked through the current state of things. Let's go add our Knex connection and all that mess. So it's a little bit bigger. So what did I do wrong? Oh, okay. So Mysql2 is a node connector to MySQL. There is also a MySQL package that's like deprecated or something. This is a very popular library for connecting to a MySQL database. So this is kind of your atom. This is your low-level connection to a MySQL database. The issue with this is the first thing you'll kind of notice is this is using the old school like node callback syntax, which is fine, but normally you're looking for like a promise-based interface to a lot of this. This package actually ships a promise wrapper, so you can require MySQL2/promise, and what you'll get out the back end is the same functions. They're just wrapped in promises. So that's nice. But so this gives you an interface to write like hard-coded SQL queries like this, and you could be a bad boy and like concatenate SQL queries together and be vulnerable to SQL injection. They offer a prepared statement interface, which is the good boy thing to do. So you use placeholders, put in values, and now you're more tolerant to SQL injection. you're not fully protected. You still screw that up pretty bad. Um, but if imagine like you've got an API, like a resource collection, and you're going to filter that, and you're kind of building up this query, you'll end up writing code that's like, well, if this query parameter is set this way, I'll add this constraint. And in the worst case, you're literally like concatenating more string onto your SQL query as you're kind of building it up, and then you'll fire it off at the end. So what we're probably grabbing for is we want more of a query builder that we interact with this interface that kind of builds up this query and has these different methods we can call on it repeatedly. But then at the very end, we can have it stitch together the SQL query and run it and give us results back. That's what Knex is. So Knex is like it's a layer on top of, it uses this Mysql2 package as a client. It can also connect, like use a Postgres connection. It can use Mysql1. But if we go look at that real quick, it connects. And this is inspired by the Laravel query builder, which was nice for me when I kind of got into the Node community. I came from the PHP community and worked with Laravel a whole lot and was missing a lot of kind of the niceties of that framework versus the more like express, bring your own Legos, stitch together your own framework, and everybody's app is a different framework. But anyway, yeah, Knex gives us a nice query builder interface. It also gives us access to migrations, database migrations, and seeds, which is very useful for tracking changes to your database over time. So adding tables, adding fields, removing fields, migrating data between tables, stuff like that. All the things you shouldn't be doing by hand. So we're going to be using this. What's up, Q? So let's see. There we go. So let's make a branch. Getting busy with MySQL and Knex. And push that up. And make our merge request, pull request. I work with GitLab day to day, and they call pull requests merge requests. And I started off using GitHub and had to get used to GitLab, and it took forever for me not to call it a pull request. Now I'm the opposite. Oh, it's not going to let me do that. Let's go ahead and commit this. You're funny, man. You're funny. All right. So those are installed. The next thing I want to do is there's different ways you can do this. You can make like a lib directory or like utils. You basically want a file that builds out your Knex connection and then exports that so you can import that in multiple places. So you want one place where the connection is actually created and then you reuse that everywhere else. So whatever you call this function doesn't really matter all that much. Utils, whatever, you call it like database. You could also just put it in the root. We'll leave it utils. We can move it around later. I'm going to say database.js. You could call this Knex. You could call it a lot of things. I picked database just because it is our database connection, and one day Knex could, eat shit, and then we're using something else. So we'll go with this. This is the type of shit, like, I'm gonna start going through here, and I won't remember like what the hell I'm supposed to be doing. So like that's obviously wrong. We're supposed to do this kind of deal. Connects. There's like a create pool or something. Yeah, apparently the answer here is go out to the documentation and just copy paste what they got and roll with that. That's probably close enough. Yeah. So module that exports database equals database. So now we can import that from other places. We might call this like connection. All right, so I know that these are the connection details for my Docker database, which we need to go start. Okay, and I should be able to do this number. Oh, the password is actually whack. But obviously you don't want this hard coded in your app, because then somebody crawl around GitHub and be like, oh, database password's whack. We get them. So what we're going to do is create us a module whose responsibility it is to wrap access to configuration variables, and we're going to pass those in as environment variables. So this one I'll probably just make as config. Let's do this. We'll make a folder called config, and we'll name this index. And this thing's job is just to export an object that is all of our config settings. And we'll probably organize this kind of like this, where it's like host is whatever, username is whatever, password, database. That's annoying. It's like config.database.database to like name. That's probably better. All right, so now we want to use that, even though it's the same like hard-coded values or whatever. But we'll fix that later. We'll say host. Rename this name. Why is it formatting it with these extra fucking spaces? Looks like trash. All right. Const config equals require config. And now we can come in here and be like config host or database host config database user database password. All right. So now we've kind of like just moved the problem somewhere else. Theoretically, this should work now. I'm gonna do one more thing before we actually like make us a little transaction script to play around with it. So what we want to be able to do is access environment variables to be able to grab those details. So in Node, the way we do that is through process.env. So process.env holds all, basically the current environment. So the current environment variables that are set for your running process. So if you like console alted Actually, let's just do it. What I like to do is make a folder called ignored in the root of my project. Go create a get ignore in there and just say ignore everything. And now I have a folder that's ignored from source control that I can just write random shit in, but use code that I'm writing. So we're going to write kind of a poke it with a stick style script to play around with the code we just wrote. So I can come in here and let's say I wanted to just console.log process.env. And then we're going to come out and we'll run that file. So right off the bat, it prints a bunch of stuff about the environment, right? So what we want instead is to say, okay, well, no, we want like MySQL host. And that doesn't exist yet. But if I came and set that environment variable on this one off command and ran it, then it's set. So you could imagine like if this app were deployed somewhere where we've set these environment variables on the system already, then the app will have a password in it. It will just read, I know the host name is in MySQL host. I know the password is in MySQL password, but I don't even know what those are. I'll look it up at runtime. For development, we still want a way of like easily controlling that so that we're not like having to do this whole export MySQL host equals localhost and like setting all this stuff up by hand every time you want to run that. So there's a package called .env. This package or something like it will probably be in every backend language you ever work with. This is a pattern that took off, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, probably more than that. But what this package does is it reads a file called .env, so period env, in the root of your project, and that file looks like this. So it's a bunch of environment variable like db host equals blah, db user equals blah, and it processes this and puts them all inside of process.env as if they actually exist that way on the host system you're running on. So, and all you have to do to use it is run that line of code. So that's what we're going to do. So if we come back over here and install .env, we wait. Or waiting. I'm going to go ahead and pull in the our config module. Source API config. And we'll just log it out. So if I go over here, I should only have to run this. And then I need to come in here and actually reference the environment variables I want. So SQL host. You can do this like, let's say I don't specify that. This syntax here basically says if this is undefined, then I'm going to use what's on the right side by default. So that's kind of useful. There's different schools of thought. Like, you know, I'll say, you know, this is cool. It's all good. Maybe don't put default passwords in. And you'll run into another developer that's like, no, fuck that. Everything has to be explicit. Because it, you know, how do you know which environment variables need to be set versus not? But it's just, you know, personal preference. All right, so I've got this. If we run this, like we run our stick, then we'll actually get something back, but you can tell like it's just giving us the defaults. And then for my password, it's undefined. So we want it to actually read a file. So what we'll do is we'll create our .env and put those in there. So MySQL host equals localhost, MySQL username equals root, MySQL password equals whack. MySQL database equals whack. And now it's pulling those values. And if I come in here and I, make changes to these and go back and look at it again, they're there. So we know that's working. But if we get status, oh, it's looking like it wants to commit this .env file. Oh no, password's in the repository again. So we just have to come and ignore that. And now we're cool. But now, imagine you're a new developer. There's no example of a .env in the directory, and you don't know what variables that need to be set. If you're, if you're in the know, you'll know, oh, I just go look at the config module, and I can dig all this shit out, and everything's cool. In practice, what we do instead, to be nice, is we make a .env.example that basically has fake values in it. And you can even do stuff like replace me or whatever. But usually what I'll do is, like, if I've decided there are default values, I'll just put them in there. Otherwise, I just leave it blank. And what would happen here is, like, if the developer actually copied this to their .env file, left this blank, they start the app, be like, can't connect, password's not right. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I didn't set a password. Everything will be fine. So, yeah. So now we have .env configured. It's reading correctly. We have our example file. Now's a good time to commit. We've got a bunch of stuff going on. We still need to make sure that our database connection is actually working. So we'll do that. Do that next. Let's see. Knex, Mysql2, and .env. Oh, let's see, did I put a link to this in the MR? Nope. All right. So let's make sure this works. We'll try to get it to work. I have a feeling we're going to need to make some changes, but we'll see. So instead, I want this to be database, and we're going to pull this out of utils. And tell you what, like, a lot of the examples you're going to find with Knex, the way you actually work with this would be like Knex and then select from table or whatever. So how about that be we'll make that the named export. So here, since Knex will already be used, actually, you know what? Leave connection. We'll just rename the export. Call this Knex. So Knex equals our connection. This is our named export. So now I can come over here. I guess it technically doesn't even matter, like, because you can just do this. This needs to be just module exports. You can call it whatever the hell you want to call it. We'll do that. But now I'm going to run a query, say like const results equals Knex show databases. And by default, this is promise-ified or whatever, but you can also use async await on it, which is what I generally prefer to use. The only thing you have to worry about there is you can't have awaits at the root of a JavaScript file. You have to wrap it in an async iffy. So we'll do that here. And this looks like some, fucking Klingon or something, but basically the short of it is it just allows us to use await. So let's console.log results. And if we did everything right, this will just work. If we didn't, you're about to see what a stump developer looks like, and we'll work through it together. Okay, so we got some poo-poo going on. Um, okay, so it's trying to find MySQL, which is that other package I was talking about. And if I remember right, Knex has a config file called Knex file where we will set the database connector or whatever we're using. In fact, if you look right here, this is wrong. Instead of MySQL, this should be MySQL2. So we may not even need the Knex file. I think I'm going to end up adding the Knex file for migrations and all that, but for right now, we'll just roll with this. We'll make migrations a tomorrow us problem. So let's see. Unhandled promise rejection. But, oh wait, no, we're good. We're Gucci. Access denied for root using a password. So maybe our password's wrong. I don't think it is though. Because yeah, if I come in and do bin MySQL and I type whack, it logs in. And I'm logged in as root. I'm pretty sure because this is -u root. So it's got to be something. It's got to be something else. Let's come back over here. This shouldn't matter. Well, let's see. Nope. Hmm. This is one of those things where it's like there's going to be something extremely obvious that's being missed. My mind is kind of going towards maybe it's a MySQL configuration thing, but then I immediately was like, well, I was thinking it could be like by default your MySQL instance is set to only allow local connections, and the fact that this is running in a container, maybe it thinks like it's pissed off and it's not going to allow a connection from the host machine to the container or whatever. But that isn't it because we're actually able to access that, and it's giving us a access denied error. Even to the point like if I remove this password and run it again, I'll get a different result. I didn't provide a password there. So we know that's not the issue. Um, but this should work. I don't know why it's not. Let's see. Knex access denied. Password. Yes. This is almost like, you know, your Knex file is structured wrong or something. We're not even using a Knex file. No. Ooh. Let's see. Try something different. That ain't gonna make a difference. I almost wonder if it's not allowed. No, it should run show databases. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm stumped. I'm not sure why this isn't working. It should connect. This is one of those like probably just gonna go ahead and move on, but it's like be off stream for 5 minutes and then it'll just work. But this one's not jumping out at me really. And what I was just looking at was like a comparable example in one of the projects we had. Um, at the beginning of the stream, I was saying, there's going to be it's the easiest things that will stump someone, and this is it. But this is also like it can't get any simpler than what we're doing, what we're trying to do. Um, because it actually sees the database is running. I can connect to it using my shell script just fine. Knex can't. Um, I don't think our issue is as simple as that. That is awesome though. The only other thing I didn't think is the permissions are set up to only allow root at localhost access, not root at that IP address, and it's pissed off because of that. Um, so for that, we'd have to add like we'd have to go check privs and be like, oh, there's a root at percent or whatever. So we can try that. Allow root login from any host MySQL. And typically you would never do this, ever. Terrible idea. It also doesn't really explain why I can connect using the terminal. Or maybe it does. I don't think it does. Select from user. Use SQL. Jesus. Yeah, there's already a host there. Is it the same password? It is. So that shouldn't be it. Because this entry right here should allow root to log in from any host. We can try this. I don't think this is it though, because it's already listed on the port. Like it's allowing the connection. Okay, so this is interesting. Doing the same thing from like a graphical client gives me the same result. Um, so it's that rules out like, some weird syntax thing we're doing or whatever. It probably is like a container config issue or something, but like I'm looking at other projects I've got and they're configured exactly the same. There's nothing special about this at all. Um, I guess maybe the only difference is the ones I'm looking at have databases created for them already, and I didn't do that here. So that shouldn't impact anything. Let's just go ahead and make a create database, whack, and exit and try again. Yeah, that won't make a difference. So I don't know. I might call it for tonight, and spend some time on this a little bit tomorrow and see what the hell's going on. But it'll be interesting to come back tomorrow and talk about it because it's gonna be like some weird, stupid little issue. Um, Gotta figure this shit out. Yeah, man. Yeah, imagine I get paid to do this. I get paid well to do this shit. And we're connecting to a database, which is like the most basic thing you can do. And I'm looking at code I wrote, you know, to do this already, and it's literally almost copy paste from what we have right now. So I don't know. It's fucking voodoo. Um, but as an example, this fucking web development is like the things you think are going to be the easiest to do will end up eating half your day, and then you'll realize, oh, it was an extra space or some stupid shit. Um, what the fuck? So, so anyway, I'll figure it out, and we'll come back tomorrow and finish up this awesomely complex task. The good news is, when we get this done, we're gonna hop right into a feature and actually write something that is useful. So, anyway, I'll see you all tomorrow.